A Record of Hating Flies. Kyōka Izumi. Part 1. It was Kinbō, the little boy, who had been up to mischief. At first, he blew softly upon the tender tips of the millet sprouts, their leaves fine and straight as a freshly shaved pate. Then, tilting his innocent face, he gazed into the goldfish bowl first from the left, then from the right, watching the darting eyes of the goldfish within. Before long, beneath the half-rolled bamboo blind of the bay window, his belly, round and full from lunch, drowsiness came over him. He turned once upon the tatami, placed his head toward his sister's sewing box, stretched out his legs, and lay on his back. Though his eyes were wide open, he looked at nothing in particular. His small, playful hand slipped into the sewing box, not seeking anything at all, and by chance, his fingers touched a soft, plump spool of thread. He pinched it lightly between his fingertips, turned it over, and set it upright in the drawer. Now, this was a room where his tender little feet played and twirled about all day long. His gentle sister, cautious and loving, had only just stepped away to the shop for a moment, but even then had carefully placed her scissors deep within the drawer, lest any accident befall her mischievous brother. The small bell tied to the scissors gave a faint cheer-in as the spool moved, as if whispering some secret into the innocent child's ear. His round cheeks bloomed with a smile, and he nodded, ringing the bell again. Delighted by the sound, he spun the spool more and more vigorously until it danced like a spinning top. Then, slipping from his fingers, it toppled to one side of the drawer, and the bell chimed once more. To his small heart, it felt as though he had lost something precious, and he gasped. But then he noticed that the end of the silk thread still clung between his fingers, barely, yet surely. Carefully, he pulled, and the spool rolled over, the thread uncoiling smoothly. As he drew it, he turned upon his back, rolling this way and that. The thread crossed from his left wrist over his chest, sagging in midair and floating before his eyes. Yet, he was so sleepy that he scarcely noticed its color. Unconsciously, he had formed the thread into a little loop, an airy ring of greenish hue that shimmered before his eyes. As he watched, crimson blended into it, and as it spun, it turned purple, then burst apart with a soft sough, splitting into 3, into 8, scattering and glittering, endlessly crimson, violet, green, all mingling in wild confusion, flying upward and downward, darting left and right, dancing forward and back, flashing, folding, and never resting for even the blink of an eye. No wind stirred to set such light things trembling. It was the stillness of midsummer at its height, when even if one pressed an ear close, one could not hear the flick of a goldfish's fin in the water. And so, against that deep silence, the boy's body trembled at the fierce sound of a fly's wings, the sound he always hated. In the same instant, the vile creature, a mere speck, darted before his eyes. Startled, he drew up his legs, but the fly vanished at once into a corner of the room, only to return an instant later and alight upon his lovely brow. There it stood, and its hairy, jointed legs began to move, one by one, as though counting his eyelashes. The boy, raised by his kind sister's gentle hand, had never once frowned, but now his tender brows knit together. Though the sensation was unbearable, he was too drowsy even to lift a hand. Turning his face aside, he felt the fly slip and crawl from the side of his cheek upward. Those creeping legs carried a strange stickiness. He wished to brush it away, but some sluggish lassitude held him still. And besides, if, in doing so, the thing should be crushed in his palm, what then? Part 2. By then, the boy's eyes, until that moment still faintly alert, half closed, and his head fell back. At that instant, the fly, which had been lapping at his cheek, drew away its mouth parts, trailing a thread of saliva, and with a droning boo, boo, flew upward but not far. In a blink, its wings folded, and the black speck slightly larger now split in two and fused again. Then, thud! It alighted upon his fine brow, only to tremble and slide away, quivering. As if dividing and merging again, the two flies crawled once more across his cheek. Each time, a chill ran through him, and it seemed as though a needle pricked his skin, leaving tiny drops of liquid here and there. The sensation reminded him, with a shock that struck his heart, of the vaccination he dimly remembered. His tongue stiffened, as though poisoned. Where had these hateful things come from? He wondered. Then it occurred to him, perhaps from there. Not long ago, among the shop's customers, had been a rustic fellow who came in, munching on an entire makuwa melon, and a gentleman who, on leaving, had vomited up his drink in the street. Whenever his sister recalled those visits, she would always cover her face with her sleeve. Surely it was from such men that the flies had brushed against her cheek, slipped beneath the shop's curtain, and flown all the way into this room. Yes, that must be it. No wonder they carried that indescribably foul stench. The thought made his chest tighten even more. His head felt heavy, his ears dulled, his senses receding as though sinking into a faraway dream. He longed to move, but his hands were numb, his legs weak, his body refused him, as if bound by invisible cords. To think I'm powerless against such a little thing. He fumed inwardly, anger welling up. Then, just as the fly rolled toward him and seemed ready to crawl across his closed eyelids, he fixed his gaze upon it, his eyes, usually mild, now sharp and unyielding. And lo, what he saw was no ordinary insect. One of them bore upon its head a strange pointed cap, as hard as iron. The other wore a gray, formal robe, like that of an old samurai retainer. Their faces were not those of flies at all. They were the faces of that drunken gentleman and the country bumpkin, twisted into demonic masks of grotesque horror. He tried to cry out, "Ah!" but the sound sank in his throat. As he struggled to rise, a ton reverberated through his body, and upon his chest sat yet another great fly. In the child's fevered mind, it seemed a hard little lump of rice cake dough had grown armor and mounted his chest like a warrior astride his steed. Around him, on either side of the tatami, came the fluttering and rustling of wings, those three devils, and more besides, perhaps 10 in all. Some surged like breaking waves, others rushed like a net being cast, flying, striking, darting, spinning, ravaging at will through the sister's empty room. It was not the child alone who suffered their torment. Upon the small chest of drawers, the Kyoto doll within its glass case shut its lovely bell-like eyes each time the flies battered against it. The lily in the wall vase, so modestly blooming, shuddered as winged maggots clung to its petals. Though no wind stirred, the blossom trembled faintly, its head nodding weakly. The boy was now near death, his breath faint and fading. In the dim corner of the room stood the household altar, fragrant with incense. Within its sacred recess, something flashed a blade, the holy sword held by Myoken-sama. One fly, startled, darted away and buzzed, muttering, "The sword is defiled, the sacred sword is sullied." Then, from the shadows came another voice, "The Buddha's hand will be dirtied. We are unclean things. Unclean, impure." They murmured thus among themselves, and for a moment, subdued by awe, grew quiet. But soon, one laughed a coarse, ugly sound. "No matter once all is filthy, nothing need be feared. Ha ha ha. Come, then what harm can it do?" And again they leapt tokoton, harari, kururi, whirling, diving, flying, until the entire room was veiled in their buzzing black mass. Within that dreadful swarm, the child's breath ceased altogether. Just then, how fortunate, the curtain at the shop entrance fluttered, and through it appeared a figure in a light summer robe, a satin sash at her waist, a fan in her snow-white hand. Her moon-like brow appeared first, and she cried, "Oh, what a dreadful swarm of flies!" Gracefully waving her hand before her face so as not to let them touch her, she stirred the air with her fan. The gentle current that rose seemed itself to be a divine wind, dispelling evil by the Buddha's own grace. The swarm broke apart, drifting and scattering like smoke. Taking her seat, she noticed hanging across her little brother's chest a single crimson thread. "You naughty boy," she said with a tender smile, gazing lovingly at his sleeping face. But then, upon his glossy lips red, as strawberries bathed in dew, she saw 2 flies. How horrible! Her willow brows arched sharply, her heart surged with anger. Before she could seize her fan, she brushed them away with the edge of her sleeve. Then, biting her sleeve tip, she wiped the spot where the vile things had vanished. From the sewing box, she drew out a small 2-fold case of pale green rouge. With her little finger, she touched the color to his lips once, lightly then glanced around the room, and once more dabbed the rouge. The scent of flowers drifted softly through the air. Kinbō's face grew serene, his breath steady. He stirred and awoke as from a dream. Had his sister not returned at that very moment, at the very least, the child would surely have suffered long.